Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. Good evening. This is Keisha Rogers, and I want to wish you a happy new year 2023 and welcome you to the LaRouche PAC Strategic Update for Monday, the 2nd of January 2023. I'm going to be joined by my colleague, Michael Stager, and for all of you who are new to LaRouche PAC, just joining us on the call or maybe just finding us on YouTube, when we put this discussion forward or put it up, we want to welcome you to our discussion of the plans for moving forward in the future. And what I think that we want to take the direction of this discussion into, as we put out in our email about the myths that died in 2022 and the movement which came alive, I think is very appropriate. And in that context, we can talk about from the myths that died, the fight against the Green New Deal, the Twitter files being exposed, and so much more, the FTX, the operations with Sam Bankman-Fried being exposed, so much. But at the same time, we saw progress, we saw a commitment to the moving forward of the nation to growth, from the breakout in development in fusion energy, in the developments of the launch of the Artemis 1 mission and how that's going to continue to play out from the standpoint of the development of space exploration as a driver of human progress, the Artemis mission that Donald Trump laid out to take Americans back to the moon and not just bring them safely to Earth, but to lay out a platform for economic development. And I think this goes very much to when President Trump was asked during his a conference of people that gathered for New Year's Eve, for a New Year's Eve party, when he was asked about his New Year's resolution, he said, first and foremost, peace should be the New Year's resolution, and that we should never have been involved in the certain wars that are taking place, particularly the war between Russia and China, between Russia and Ukraine. And secondly, we need stronger borders, and that we need to bring back the economy and get rid of inflation. And I think this was a very important starting point to what we must drive for 2023 going into 2024. And 2022 also brought about the announcement of President Trump declaring his commitment or his presidency for the 2024 presidency, his campaign for the 2024 presidency. Now, as we think about that, how do we bring those, they're not just resolutions, we want to lose weight, we want to do better, but the resolutions that must be the driver of our republic, and resolutions that will only come to being if we reject the ideologies that have been put forth for far too long, the miseducation, as Mr. Lyndon LaRouche used to call it and took on very strongly, the miseducation of our citizenry, and to actually organize a citizenry once again in a movement, as we discussed last week, that is based on truth. And I was just talking to Michael about this. I think that when you talk about a civilization based on the commitment to truth, we're not just talking about a movement that, oh, we're exposing the bad guys, oh, we're going after the corruption, but a movement that is going to be totally redefined by that which is greater, that which is truly human. And that's something that Lyndon LaRouche always committed himself, and his dedication to is to the idea of a society of the principles of our republic, of our American system, of our revolution, based on the concepts of a society that is embraced, or that is developed by the commitment to truth. So that's what we're going to be talking about tonight. And I want Michael, there's a lot that's going on that we can look forward to in 2023 and to look forward to in what we're going to be shaping going into the future. So as we go look at, as LaRouche PAC put out, and you can go to our website, looking back at our commitment and what we put in place in our dedications and our involvements in 2022, you can expect a whole lot more from LaRouche PAC. And I hope that each and every one of you had a chance to explore that. If you're the first time going to our website, go to larouchepac.com. You can look at all of the events and activities that we were engaged in, our commitment to a national banking system, to a project Prometheus, advancing fusion, nuclear power, so much more, and to optimism for the future. So I will let Michael expound on that and give you a sense of what you can look forward to from LaRouche PAC and from our activities going forward. But I think this question is a movement based on truth is very appropriate for the new year.
Yeah, I agree. Thanks, Keisha. All right, so there's a lot to discuss in some respects, but a lot of it's already been determined by the events of the last, or by the dynamic that's unfolding. To what extent there's a dominant faction right now in the Republican Party is yet to be determined in terms of what happens in Congress. And certainly the situation in Ukraine, though it remains incredibly dangerous, it's unfolding based on a process that's characterized largely by the insanity of the current neoliberal Biden and Western regime. What I want to discuss with people tonight to kind of develop this idea of a movement based on truth. What does that mean? Why is this so important? And we touched on a number of aspects last week, whether it's the censorship, the COVID questions, the war questions, the line. And this goes back, and to some extent, to the first major intervention that I worked with Lyndon LaRouche on, which was going after the neocons and Leo Strauss. But perhaps the defining factor, and though that's certainly part of the composition, the Iraq War and the entire security apparatus and Patriot Act, the surveillance state, basically, that I want people to reflect upon, and many of you may not be in your 20s or 30s right now, and some of you watching on YouTube, maybe you are, but the defining event, which was now 14 years ago, was the massive bailouts to Wall Street. And this was in lockstep with the security state, the massive surveillance of the American people. It even included at the time by Dick Cheney a threat of martial law if the bailouts did not go through. The American people rejected them on a Monday vote, and this was the first round of bailouts. I think it was the TARP bill. But the bailouts totaled nearly $30 trillion in terms of the kinds of lending. And then ultimately you get quantitative easing, which increased the Federal Reserve balance sheet. Well, let me get to that in a second. So the American people voted this down on Monday, and then it was rammed through Congress by Friday with threats of martial law and everything else coming from Cheney and others. Obama at that time, just to refresh people's memory, was basically by his backers, the people running the current program, and Obama was a deep, deep operation in every regard, was actually sent to speak to the Black Caucus, the Congressional Black Caucus, which was very likely to oppose Bush on this and make a big stink about it. That would have been at least to their political advantage, regardless of what the character of the members might have been. It would have been to their political advantage. And some of them, I think, had the courage to come out and say it. Many of them had called for the impeachment of Bush. So Obama goes there and tells them to basically get in line, to kick off your bedroom slippers, and to get in line and shut up. I'm the leader now. I'm the chosen one. I'm the Messiah. And Obama went in hardcore on the bailouts. John McCain's campaign actually called for a pause to both campaigns. This is in September of 2008, less than 2 months till the election. And the Obama campaign rejected that call for a mutual pause. The purpose being that both of the candidates and their teams would go in and discuss the policy steps that Bush was going to take, because clearly their administration was going to have to deal with whatever they initially started, and that this was a huge, huge crisis. So this isn't a question of, am I an honest person? It is a sense of what no matter how honest a parent, a family may be, as devout and pious as a family may be, attempting to raise a generation in an environment where there is no accountability, that people who lie, cheat, and steal and injure tens of thousands of Americans, maybe hundreds of thousands of Americans really injured in the wars, millions of other people killed and lives destroyed and cities destroyed in the wars of the last 20 years, all largely based on total lies, not just Afghanistan or Iraq. Remember, Afghanistan, the Taliban were out of power in 2 months. We went in October and they were gone in early December of 2001. It's time to leave. But Libya, Syria, Ukraine, the coup there, and now the ongoing war. But the people that are involved in this, people like Victoria Nuland, John Bolton. John Bolton is still out there. The Bush family continues to be revived. Jeb Bush was the leading candidate in 2016 until Donald Trump basically took a machete to him and hacked him to pieces. And I hope the Bush boy DeSantis runs again today, merely for the fact that there's nothing better to revive the patriotic, blood and energy of the American people than watching the Bush party get hacked to pieces. That gets all Americans somewhat excited about being an American because of what they did to the country. But the bailouts, all these people failed upwards, as you see it in the foreign policy. But perhaps even worse was watching the society become financially and economically put into ruin. Young people's entire early careers totally stunted and shifted. While our top concern was the people at the top of the financial pyramid, a pyramid of fraud, a financial fraud, become bailed out, to become rescued, to have golden parachutes deployed essentially by US government policy. Hank Paulson, you name it, come to the rescue to bail out these institutions. Now, what happened over these 14 years? It was only 7 years, almost to the day, between 9/11 and the Lehman Brothers bankruptcy and crisis in September of 2008, 7 years. It's been 14 years since the Federal Reserve, US-backed global bailout. It wasn't just, of course, the Fed, it's Bank of England, it's the European Central Bank, it's the Bank of Japan, it's the global central banking system Now, what's happened? You didn't save the system. And again, remember the premise of Leo Strauss and the Straussians that drove us into the state of perpetual war, even arguing for crusades, revival of the archaic crusade policy, Christianity versus Islam. What a wonderful world to live in. Perpetual religious war. Their premise is that one has to lie. It's actually necessary to keep civilization going. Well, it's never civilization, but it is their particular system. But was the system merely saved? Did they just keep the system that was going in 2008 going? No. They took the most corrupt, the people that were willing to turn their backs on the population, like the Vichy government in France, that when France was run over by the Nazis quickly in 1940, that Marshal Pétain basically became kind of the dictator of France in a place called Vichy, France, in direct collaboration with Hitler and the Nazis. Or those who rushed to become Nazis. Once you saw not just simply a kind of brutish political process that was angry about the destruction of Germany, but once you saw what the Nazis were in power, that people then ran to the front. The most psychopathic, sociopathic, the people that had lost their sense of concern for the population as a whole of the nation. It was merely about their individual power and success. You took that layer of the population, which exists within every society, and we have rules and morals and certain underlying principles that look to check that unfettered strive for power and greed on every level. And you basically said, those who are willing to operate on that standard of pure selfish so-called success credentials will be the ones who are rewarded. Whether it's in media, law, corporations, Congress, universities. And of course, all of this is then filtered through the kind of psychedelic psychodrama of the Obama administration. The transgender sexuality, pro-drugs, legalization of massive narcotics, incredibly open, wild, and insane border for the cartels, get complete corporate free hand in everything from drug money laundering to monopolization, cartels, whatever, you name it. That we've created a society that has rewarded the least among us. And it's not just who we've elected to Congress. And as the old adage goes, and Lyndon LaRouche was a fan of this one, people get the government they deserve. And this is why then, when you look at this generation, if you look 14 years ago, you take anyone under the age of 35 to 40, all they've known in their lifetime. That's largely the millennial generation. And then if we get into your early 20s and younger, you would get into what they call the new Zoomer generation, which, as I said last week, shows an entirely different edginess because they've seen the frauds of college debt and college curriculum and the neoliberal culture and the lies of the Iraq War and the bailouts. But the millennials felt like this was the only way to make it. This was the Silicon Valley. This is the Uber Lyft generation. Everything is going to become some kind of boutique, decentralized service economy, whether it's people buying your food and delivering it to you, or taking you to the bar, or giving you an IV to restore your nutrients after drinking too much, or bringing you heroin or some other concoction. I mean, that's the economy that has been built up in Silicon Valley. And of course, then you advertise all of this on your social media accounts and whatever ways. You know, the flourishing of this massive arena sports, it was always insane. But of course, now we have legalized gambling throughout the country. There's been a discussion, you know, everyone knows the holiday favorite, It's a Wonderful Life, by Frank Capra, somebody we may be covering on the website at some point here. who did a number of documentaries, propaganda films during the war, but everyone knows It's a Wonderful Life. Well, we've become Potterville, where you take out the honest man of integrity. You push him to the wayside. You make fun of him for not making $1 million on the housing bubble and the flipping of the housing, or make fun of him because he doesn't put 17 flags on his car after 9/11 and support the bum rush into the Iraq war. Many good people got caught up in that. I don't hold them accountable for the war, but we have to remember that if we don't have an honest society, if we don't have true citizens, if we're not able to check our own emotions and our own mistakes, then how do we hold accountable the people who are destroying the country? And for the generation today, 35, 40 and younger, for 14 years, all they've seen is the complete and total disregard of any notion of accountability. You are rewarded as long as you're in the right place with the right people, you're associated with the right crowd, you will likely be bailed out. Many people deeply embedded in the financial system with careers of 50 years in the financial services sector scratch their heads and wonder, what happens when the music really stops, when there really is no bailout? When people find out that no matter who they associated with, no matter that they made the bets everybody else made, it just doesn't matter. Because for many people working in the financial services, many people holding massive amounts or involved in this huge Ponzi scheme that is not just FTX, but the entire central banking and global equities and financial system. They've never known a time when they weren't bailed out as the top priority of society and everybody else is in the dredges. So when we talk about a movement for truth, when we talk about these questions of what Trump 2024 represents, it's far bigger than merely the presidential campaign. And it is this question that is that specific question on the economic level. Yes, a foreign policy mistake could occur. Yes, we got caught up in a patriotic fervor post 9/11. Yes, we were outright lied to and misled by every media and foreign policy figure to drive us into the war. And those people that did that were rewarded and kept in the limelight. We can all be forgiven for that. And really, the American people should be applauded because it was only within 3 years, in 2006, where they voted overwhelmingly to toss the bums out, and then did it again in 2008. But we have yet to correct, to address and hold accountable the criminals that we have rewarded with the greatest financial scam in human history. Let's remember that besides the $9 trillion added to the Federal Reserve balance sheet, which is just the Fed, there's probably a lot of crap paper on a lot of banks' books that wasn't there before. So-called maybe off balance sheet. Who knows? I don't know how Wall Street works. We just have some cracks into some of it. But we also know that just during COVID alone, the Federal Reserve and central bank system printed $6 trillion in new notes. While our federal debt is skyrocketing out of control. Now, the problem is that you get some Republicans say, yeah, we've got to stop the debt and we've got to rein in Social Security and Medicare. And this is why Trump's leadership is so key. He called these things exactly what they were, just pathetic traps set by the Democrats. And the Republicans, or paid operatives for the globalists who call themselves Republicans, will come out and say, yeah, we've got to deal with, entitlements. Well, entitlements mean Social Security and Medicare to the average American. Trump said, this is just absurd. We're never going to cut these, ever, ever. We're going to make them more guaranteed than any party in human history. We're going to grow the economy, but you're not going to touch those an iota. And these are just traps. But you don't address the debt as a thing in itself. You address the criminality. And if there is a movement premised not only on ending these wars, not only on what Lyndon LaRouche proposed, which was if in the 19th century, the major nations in the world were France and Germany and Great Britain and Italy and so on, the so-called G7 today, if that may have been true, that may have been true post World War II even, that these were still the dominant industrial and economic nations in the world. And our foreign policy could be logically justified to be premised on working with those nations. That logic is completely gone. In many cases, these nations are not nations. They're part of a collective called the European Union with no representation. So to have a movement that's out to end these wars, to deal with the real major nations on the planet, which would be Russia, China, and India to start. These will be the nations that are the dominant nations among others, but perhaps the crux of the dominant nations of the 21st and other centuries to come. A movement of this regard, but a movement of, if anything, to get at the true corruption and lie that our economy is not for us to determine and direct, that we can set clear standards, clear missions, clear goals of physical nature that can grow and develop our economy and will hold people who have been running this criminal program accountable. Not the leftovers like Sam Bankman-Fried, pathetic man who deserves all of the justice that this system gives him. But we all know that Sam Bankman-Fried is merely a symptom, a pimple on the butt, on the ass of a 7,000-pound gorilla who's got severe indigestion and diarrhea. And we're going to address that. And that's what a movement for truth looks like. And if that movement exists today, I have no doubt in my mind, it will awaken and unify this entire country, because there is not a voting person alive today that does not look at that compromise as the very basis to be cynical, to take whatever they can get, to get whatever money they can get out of this system, to hell with the nation, to hell with any unity. Because if we're going to let these creepy slumlords continue to run this country into the ground, not merely the ones in Washington, but the entire financial class, based on the lie, not because they're all horrible people. Many of them may be decent people, but if that system and that operation is premised on the lie of what happened in 2008. And that's why LaRouche PAC is called to end the central banking system, to end the Federal Reserve, and to reverse it. But at core, this question lurks deeper in the minds and hearts of many Americans, and especially those under 40, as the defining factor of how our society is organized today. All the anger against the United States, all the sense of economic injustice. It isn't climate change. It isn't that somebody stored chemicals in the backyard somewhere and that's been harmful. It's not climate change. It's this crime. Everything else is done to obfuscate the crime of a generation, to literally loot, destroy, and then massively drug a generation. And this is the lie that has to be corrected. So I'll leave my opening comments there. Hopefully other people have thoughts in response to this, not because I think that's comprehensive but hopefully it's a way to get the discussion started. So Keisha, I'll throw it back to you.